Welcome everyone to another episode of #52Needs. And this week we are talking about communication. And I'm so delighted to have with me David Doerrier, who is the founder of Present Your Way to Success, where he empowers speakers, trainers, and sales organizations to engage their audiences and present their way to success from any stage. David has energized and informed thousands about the power of incorporating engagement into their presenting style. He is an expert at guiding trainers, speakers, and sales organizations through a process of revamping their current presentations to include simple-to-apply processes that every successful speaker uses to motivate, engage, and transform any audience. David is a seasoned Toastmaster, proficient instructional designer, train the trainer and facilitation expert, voiceover artist, classroom facilitator, and professional Santa Claus.
Coming up to the Santa season.
Yes, and you will probably be very busy, I gather.
Yes, starting in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, okay. Well, he is already in full swing.
Yes.
We've been listening to Christmas music for the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So you train speakers, right? So, and it's all about communication. So I want to expand what you do, because what you do is what we do in everyday life. It's just when you're doing it from stage, it's amplified.
Right.
So you have to be really, really clear in your communication and really purposeful. And that's not something that we often do in everyday life. Communication can become very sloppy, and especially when we know people really well, we can get into the traps of mind reading, for example. And that's something that you cannot afford as a speaker. You have to be really, really clear, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. So just to clarify one thing, it's more than just speakers. It would be all types of presenters, from a CEO to, and that's fine, CEOs to managers to subject matter experts, business owners that, as you said, all have that same objective, being able to be clear with their message and connect with their audience.
Well, there we go. I already had communication, because for me, speaker is anybody who speaks. But of course, speaker in this context means it's somebody. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And that's a good example of that, you know, your definition of speaker and my definition of speaker. Now that we've clarified it, yes, it makes sense. But a lot of times message sent is not always message received.
Well, it's what I've got in my head that says this is this. Like when we talk about fruit, for example, which is something I use all the time, you know, and I talk about making a fruit salad, you may have what in your mind? Apples, bananas.
Yeah, apples, bananas, grapes, maybe even some lettuce or something like that to be a part of it. And nuts.
Whereas I'm going, no, pineapple, mango, papaya, right? And already we're totally on different pages, but we still talk about fruit salad.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes. So the yes. So again, message sent is not always message received. And there are I've also worked with some tools to help organizations improve their communication within the team, within the entire organization itself, because many times there are conflicts that can arise within an organization strictly because of people's perceptions, because you react a certain way to what I've said to you. Or in my case, I ask a lot of questions, and that has upset some of my managers in the past. Like, you ask too many questions. Well, I have to ask a lot of questions so I can see it, feel it, taste it, smell it, understand it in my head. So communication, extremely important.
Yeah. Well, since we're already at work, we may as well stay there. So I mean, you know that I'm really passionate about effective leadership. And so when you talk about, you know, people communicating clearly, what makes a great leader? What makes, I mean, we're talking about somebody who stands on stage and communicates.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you need to have a vision and all of that. But what really makes a great leader who communicates?
Yeah, so we'll just focus on just that communication piece, because there's many other pieces that a leader has to have in their hip pocket to be an effective leader. But certainly when it comes to presentation skills, I think that being able to be proficient, being able to communicate your message in a way that connects to your audience, for example, using good stories, relevant stories, having an opening to the presentation, having a body, using transitions if it's appropriate, and certainly having a conclusion, speaking fluently so people can understand you, being able to project your voice, stage presence, body language. 93% of our body language or 93% of our message comes from body language. So a leader could have all of the textbook skills of being a great leader, but now when it comes time to stand up in front of an audience and they keep their hands in their pocket, they walk from side to side nervously, or stand behind the lectern, lean on the lectern the entire time, they are looking down, they don't have good eye contact, all of those things are going to say something, in this case, possibly something negative to the audience.
Right. And I'd often deal with leaders who had on the other side of the part of communication, the other side of the coin, because communication is not just talking, it's also about listening. And so there are a lot of people who know how to talk, but they don't necessarily know how to listen. And it's, when they say you've got 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth, use them in proportion. That doesn't always work. And again, with communication, especially with leaders, when they get into a new role, presentation, being really clear about vision, about purpose, about engagement, and all of that is really important. But I think you and I would probably agree on that, the fact that asking questions and finding out where people are at is equally important.
Yes.
And especially in the first 90 days.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And asking questions properly. There's one question that all facilitators, and I would put a leader and trainer and any type of speaker and presenter in that bucket of facilitator. There's one question that all facilitators should never ask, and that is, are there any questions? Or a closed-ended question. 9.9 times out of 10, if you've ever been in a classroom or if you've been a participant in observing a speaker and they say, are there any questions? 9.9 times out of 10, nothing, crickets. Yeah. So the questions need to be open-ended questions. What questions do you have about this new process? What questions do you have about the new project that we're going to be working on? What questions do you have about this specific thing that I mentioned? So again, it needs to be an open-ended question and not closed-ended.
Well, there's a lot of times we just ask these closed questions, because we want agreement. We don't necessarily want to open up that can of worms of somebody is going to question what I've already decided. Right. And so communication is also the willingness to be vulnerable and get another viewpoint in.
Yes.
Another perception, as you said, perception matters so much. But often when we have the perception, we don't want to shift off that. And again, that's where my thing, emotions come in. I've invested so much emotion in explaining my viewpoint here now, and I'm not going to shift off that because I'm really stuck on that. Whereas if I change my emotion and I change my viewpoint, I'm already open to more information coming in from a different place.
Yeah, and I've heard that from many. A lot of my work is working with trainers, and many of them will avoid asking questions, mainly because they're afraid of what questions will come at them, and they're afraid that they may not be able to answer the question. Now, a trainer, a leader, you don't have to have all the answers immediately. That's why you have these people around you that you can go to that are the experts, and it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you.
Exactly. But a lot of people don't even want to do that. Right. As you said, we have to be the perfect expert. And and that's the vulnerability again, if I admit that I don't know something. And I think what it does, it sets up that false expectation that when I reach a certain level of competence or role, like job description, I need to have all the answers. And as you said, being able to ask questions. Now, I always love the story of Henry Ford, who actually went to court because somebody said he wasn't really equipped to run a company. And there was this, do you know how to build a car, Mr. Ford? And he said, no, but I know I employ people who know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. And so yeah, I had something in my mind that I was going to say, but now I forgot it. It was around the. I know. I worked with a lot of middle managers, training them on leadership skills, training them on communication skills. And many of them will feel like that when they transition into this role, one thing that they have to know everything. And the other thing that's difficult for them is to give up what the responsibilities that they had before they were in this middle management role. So two things that they struggle with is one is giving up those tasks and delegating those. And number two is feeling like now I've got to know everything. And that isn't true.
Yeah, I think we have the same clients.
Yes. They're all over the world.
It doesn't matter where in the world you are, be it in the United States or in Australia or wherever, it's the same. Okay, yeah. So the thing is, communication has changed vastly especially over the last 3 years, because we are now communicating much more virtually. And it's going to be, and it's especially in leadership, in every kind of working organization, and in our personal relationships we're going to talk about later. But at work, I mean, I can only see part of you up to here. And as you said, 93% of communication is body language and tonality. So we grab that, but I can only see part of you.
Right.
So, and my brain is probably going to be constantly struggling to fill in the blanks. What's happening beneath the screen? Like, is there any movement going on? Any kind of gesturing? And so so that's why I find it really more exhausting to be on Zoom than to be in the same room with someone.
Yeah.
But when we work in companies, we rely on this, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you're meaning that when you're working in companies now, we're all face to face working in close quarters with each other. Yes. So a couple of things about the Zoom world. You are correct. Not only do we not know what's going on from the chest down with individuals, but also what's going on in the rest of this room, what's going on in front of me, what kind of distractions am I having? Yeah. Also, if it was smell-o-vision, you'd smell the dinner coming upstairs, working its way up. So that being a distraction as well. So when it comes to Zoom, that you've got to crank it up to an 11 when it comes to the engagement. There needs to be more questions, relevant questions, setting that stage up front. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? All these things are important face to face as well. And some other things to be proficient or to display your professionalism is to be proficient with the equipment. People now are getting a lot better with Zoom, but in the early days when we first were sequestered, people were struggling with the platform. So now if somebody struggles with the platform today, we don't have as much patience with that individual as we did a couple of years ago. Also, looking into the camera. How many times have you had a presenter just looking down the entire time or looking at another screen the entire time? Here,
running 2 meetings at the same time. I've had that.
Well, now that's a new one on me. Running 2 meetings, I don't see how you can, or being on the phone while you're supposed to be engaged in a meeting. So one way that you can connect to your virtual audience, which takes a little practice, is looking directly into that camera. And at minimum, what I would suggest is during your opening, during your conclusion, during transitions, when you're asking questions, when you're answering questions, when you're telling stories, where you don't have to look at your notes, you don't have to look at your PowerPoint, you are looking directly into that camera and you are creating that intimate connection with your audience.
Yeah. When you talk about storytelling, we have lived on stories for thousands of years. We connect by telling stories to each other. This is how we learn about each other's experiences. We can get a picture of somebody. Now the preferred method of communication is totally task-oriented. It's very much to the point. I mean, you can't even write paragraphs anymore. You have to actually write single sentences in order to keep people's attention. And anybody who tells a story for more than 2 minutes, they go, come on, let's get going. And preferred way of communicating is texting these days. And that's emojis, that's LOLs, that's, all of these things. I mean, do we still really communicate? Or is it just something?
Just words?
Yeah.
I think that my initial response is yes, yes, but there are a lot of struggles, like you said, because texts, emails can certainly be misinterpreted because you don't feel the emotion that's coming through. If I'm typing up an email with nothing but love, and then someone on the other end is reading it and whatever's going on in their day, and they interpret it a very different way. But to go back to what you were saying earlier about the storytelling, yes, my first recommendation to business owners or to anyone that's going to incorporate stories is to keep them short, concise, to the point. For example, I have a client that was struggling. Now my client has a business. He's in the paper business. Oh, wait a minute. It's not the paper business. He makes business cards. And I met him last Thursday. No, wait a minute. It wasn't Thursday. It was Friday. And we had lunch with Pete. Well, no, it wasn't Pete. It was Dave. So I'm giving the example. We don't need all of that information in there. So I have a client who is struggling with this, with connecting to his audience. I gave him the solution. We worked through these solutions very quickly, and now he is experiencing this success. Very quick, very concise, and relevant to my audience as well. Now, there are people that are great storytellers that can do a great job of painting that picture with words and keeping that audience's attention for longer periods of time. And that is great if you can do that. But there needs to be lots of description. For example, I was helping someone create a speech recently, and he incorporated his dog into the speech. And all he said is, my dog. Well, what color is the dog? What kind of dog is it? What size is the dog? Is it bigger than a bread box? Is it smaller than a bread box? Those types of things. So when you can add those little bits and pieces in there, now the audience can do a better job of envisioning what it is you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's the same goes in any kind of conversations. Right. I mean, again, if I just talk about fruit salad and I don't explain what kind of fruit salad I want to make, or I expect the person to make who's sitting in front of me, just make a fruit salad, I may end up with something that has absolutely nothing to do with what I intended.
Exactly.
Clarity. I mean, we've talked about this before, about how people also learn, visually, kinesthetically, VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. But that we have a mix of all of that. And that when we communicate, it's really important to bring that, to put that, now I'm losing my words, to bring that across. Right. So that everybody is included when you communicate with them. Because if I keep saying to you, you see the big picture and you see how this is going, but at this point, I'm just wanting to sound things out in my mind, or I want to get in touch with how I'm feeling about things, because when I'm thinking in pictures, it's much, much faster than when I spell words out, or when I listen to myself talk, or when I get in touch with my feelings. People, and if I want to get in touch with my feelings, that's a little bit slower than making a picture.
Right. And also what you're seeing in your head, you see it really clear in your head, but if you don't do a good enough job of expressing that to your audience, you're not able to paint that picture with words. Yes. So and even in a work environment, many times conflicts can arise when a manager gives you this much information on the project and you still have no clue on what it is you need to do.
Because there's this presupposition that if I use a certain word, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
You have that when you go into companies and they use acronyms.
I was in the military, and it's all acronyms.
But the thing is, I mean, one acronym in one company means something totally different in another one. But if I transfer that meaning, I can get myself into totally deep trouble. So now I always say, what does that acronym stand for?
Right,
and again, It's like a lot of the times it could mean something completely different. And that can change a conversation completely.
Yeah. And you've brought up another great point, is that this is what I wanted to say earlier, is that with trainers, many of them don't understand who their audience is and what level of current understanding. And this not only for trainers, but it can be for someone running a meeting. It could be for a CEO that's now speaking to the organization. They've got a lot more knowledge about new projects than anybody else in the organization. And if they start using these acronyms and these other words and other bits and pieces of that project that we have no idea about, then we're going to be lost. So there's one of the principles of adult education or adult learning is the principle of complexity. And here it's understanding what is the current knowledge level of your audience on whatever the topic is that you're talking about. And I like to use a swimming pool as a visual. Have you ever experienced a speaker, trainer, or facilitator that when they first started talking, they started using all these acronyms and very complex examples and so on? I see that as someone who has dove into the deep end of the pool, where your audience might be still down there at the shallow end of the pool, or they may not even be in the pool yet. They haven't even put on their swimming trunks yet. So first is understanding, where is my audience in that pool? And then I need to be with them at their level, and then slowly bring them with me and checking for understanding as we go down to that deep end of the pool.
What I sometimes do, which confuses people sometimes, is I go to the dictionary definition. And I say, okay, so are we on the same page here? Because there are various definitions for one word. And, and which one do we really is the one that we adhere to?
Right.
And what is, and sometimes it's like, oh, can we really take this for granted? I love the word conflict, for example, because conflict is about, when you look at the definition, it's about I'm not really good with my words today. When something is not reconcilable. Help me out.
Reconcilable? Irreconcilable?
Thank you. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Because it means it can't be solved. So if I go into a conflict resolution, it doesn't, the brain goes, that makes no sense, because conflict on some level is something you can't solve. So when I say to people, well, let's have a constructive discussion, that's far more solution oriented and it's far more constructive. I mean, it really allows people to be more open. I mean, somebody says, let's have some conflict resolution. I'm already on the back foot and I go, there's a conflict here. And it's going to be extended. It's going to be aggressive. There's going to be problems with it.
Yeah. And you brought up another great point about about each of us having our own understanding of a word, for example, that, and you talked about the fruit salad. One of the things that I find that I will do at the beginning of a training session is, if we're going to be, our objective is to understand what, for example, I was working with someone recently and he was using the term founder.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of people with, what does that mean? You know, to him, he understands that a founder is the owner of a company. So what first needs to be done is, let's define what that is. So when we go through this entire day-long training session, you're not sitting there thinking, by the end of the day, I still don't know what founder means. He said it 9,000 times and I have no idea what it means.
Yeah. Yes, yes, absolutely. No, I just had a look at the clock and went, oh my God, this went so fast. We're way over time, but I could talk with you about this for hours, but we've got another chat coming up about how communication in life works or not works. And I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.